Always fun to talk to people about local politics and, really get a grasp on what's going on in different parts of the nation.
Yeah. So can you start with what we usually ask as our first question, which is just, tell me a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for the State House of Representatives.
Yeah, well, I have been involved in politics for quite some time in one form or another. So it started back in high school a long time ago when a lady named Stephanie Herseth Sandlin was running for U.S. House. And so that was my very first campaign that I ever worked on. I moved on to working on campaigns in Nebraska when I was in college. And then after that, I ended up in Senator Tim Johnson's office after grad school. So that was my last kind of political gig, if you want to call it that, working for Tim out in D.C. as a research assistant. And it's been a few years since I've really been working in politics and found this opportunity to run for office as a way to get back involved into it. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to get back to asking you about grad school in a little bit. But first, can we talk a little bit about District 14 and just a technical question about this election? So if I'm understanding correctly, there's 2 representatives. Is it from each district, or are some districts different than others?
Correct. There are 2 representatives from each district, and then there's 1 senator from each district. So a total of 2 representatives from each partisan party can run within that district.
Does each voter get to select 2 candidates?
Correct. Each can vote for 2 candidates, and the top 2 who receive the most votes will be the representatives for that district.
Okay. And currently there are 2 Republicans in this seat.
That is correct. Yep. And they are also running for re-election. Every 2 years, we vote for new state representatives and senators.
Okay. And so where in South Dakota is District 14? What is this district like?
District 14 is in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is in the southeast corner of the state. And my district is pretty large. It is in kind of a southeastern central area of Sioux Falls. There are many different types of households here, so it is mainly middle class, but we do see a lot of blue-collar Dems, and we also have an area of the district that is a little bit wealthier.
And so Sioux Falls is the largest city in South Dakota, and usually I think of cities and I think a little more progressive Democrats, but of course there's 2 Republicans in this district right now. What is Sioux Falls like politically?
Sioux Falls does lean a little bit more liberal than the rest of the state. People are a little bit more moderate if they are Republicans. Although you do see, as you would anywhere, any sort of Republican or Democrat, for that matter, within the city. Compared to the rest of the state, though, it's definitely more liberal than the rest.
And so I know you've been out knocking doors a lot, talking to voters. So what are the sorts of things you're hearing from people, both in terms of issues and then also kind of how your campaign is being received by the voters?
Yeah, so I am almost completely done knocking the district for the very first time. I will get done on Friday. A lot of what I'm hearing, the number one issue is education. So I live in a district where our school district recently has grown and our schools have become incredibly crowded. And our city just passed a $190 million bond so we can build a brand new elementary, middle, and high school. And regardless of political affiliation, people were supporting this and mentioning this to me out on the campaign trail, even though it is a city issue. I think that reflects really well regarding state politics, because regardless of political affiliation, people care about making sure that our kids are getting that education they need to succeed later in their life. So education is definitely the number one issue I'm hearing about. I'm also hearing a lot about healthcare. We are one of the states that chose to not expand Medicaid after we lost federal funding. So people are really concerned about that and want to see that expanded. And they also are concerned about the cost of insurance. So that's another issue. And then we're also hearing a lot about the economy. So our two main sources of revenue for our state are tourism and agriculture. And in order to make sure that we are always looking to expand and create a more vibrant economy within South Dakota, we need to make sure that we are looking at innovative ways to grow. And I think part of that means making sure that we are finding jobs available for the younger generations. I know as a 30-something-year-old here in South Dakota that I have seen so many friends leave the state because they cannot find the jobs or the wages necessary to stay here and to support their families. And they're looking for those professional careers that we just can't provide right now. So I think it's really important to make sure that we have a healthy, welcoming environment to come to, one that companies would love to grow in and really find a home in Sioux Falls or in South Dakota.
And so do people, when you speak to them at the doors, do they seem receptive to voting for a Democrat? Do they just want someone who will work on the issues they care about? What does that kind of feel like when you're talking to them?
I have met a lot of people who are incredibly receptive to voting for a Democrat. It's really all about getting out there and talking to voters and letting them know that their voice matters. I think a lot of South Dakotans, or at least people within my district, are incredibly willing to, if you're registered as a Republican and or if you're leaning more conservative as an independent, they're more willing to vote for you if they've met you and they understand what you stand for and you're having a face-to-face conversation with them. I mean, of course, you're always going to come across people that no matter what won't vote for you, and you smile and you move on and you realize that that's not going to happen that often in District 14.
So I want to go back and ask you a little bit about your graduate school training. So you have an MA in political science, and you actually wrote a thesis on state legislators' responsiveness to constituent policy preference. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how that sort of academic study of state legislature and public policy, how that kind of informs or doesn't inform your run for office to a state legislature.
I think my master's thesis definitely did affect my running so early in my life. It's not normal for 30-year-olds to be running for state house. But yeah, so I began researching in 2012 the disconnect between South Dakota state legislators and their constituents' policy preference. So in our state, we have seen a lot of abortion legislation come up within our state legislature year after year. And what I found was, although these state legislators were voting for all of these different bills that were continuously creating bans within our state of women's choice, the voters were not accepting their bills, and they were creating initiative measures, which, if you don't know, is a process that we have in South Dakota. So we can actually create our own laws without a state legislator. It's a citizen-approved initiative, basically. So they were creating these initiative measures, and they were also overturning bills with referendums, stating that these abortion bans were too strict and were not what they agreed with. That disconnect is still prevalent today. I have talked to so many voters about their concerns, and many people feel as if they don't have a voice at our state house. A good example of that would be an initiative measure that we recently passed in 2016. And that was Initiative Measure 22, that actually revised state campaign finance and lobbying laws. And it created a publicly funded campaign finance program and an ethics committee. So this passed, people believed that this was needed in our state. And our state legislature, they actually defied it and wrote a bill to repeal it. So they said that they respected the intent of the voters and that they didn't believe that it was the right way to create this whole new process. But there are still bits and pieces of that initiative measure that have not been fixed, and people are really angry about it. They feel like they were told they were wrong and that they weren't smart enough to, create this piece of legislation in, our initiative measure. People were really upset that this bill was passed by our representatives to not initiate this initiative measure.
So what do you think then is the solution to that? I mean, obviously just listening to your constituents, but do you think that there are kind of more systematic ways that, if you're elected to the legislature, that you can make sure that the legislature is acting with the intention of the constituents?
I don't know if I have an answer to that, because I feel like it's been years that people have not been listened to. And here, where our state capital is, quite some distance from a lot of our towns. And it's 3.5 hours from Sioux Falls and 3 hours from our next largest town, Rapid City. In the middle of the state, in the middle of winter, is when our session meets. And I think people just don't quite pay attention to our state issues. And until things like Initiative Measure 22 happen, people weren't really focused on what was going on as much as they should have been. I really do think things are changing with the current political environment that we've seen, across the nation. People are finally stepping up and reading the news and trying to make sense of what is going on, both on a local level and a national level.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about?
We fill our session, each legislature session, with a lot of contentious issues that only further divide our state. And it is time to focus on issues that truly matter to voters. And those issues, which I mentioned earlier, healthcare, education, the economy, it seems so simple, but for some reason, they're the issues that we aren't focusing on. And our time in Pierre is precious. We only meet January through the beginning of March. And so we need to focus on these issues that really affect people and South Dakotans on a daily basis.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign for these remaining weeks, how can they do that?
Yeah, so right now I am looking for a lot of volunteers. I have 34 days left to walk the district one more time. And that is for Get Out the Vote efforts. And so if anyone is interested in helping me knock on doors and talk to voters and make those connections with people and drive them to the polls, that is the most incredibly important thing that we can do right now. I know that not everyone is comfortable talking to voters. And in that case, I also need people to just start dropping lit at doors. I have lists for people. That is when push comes to shove, and we just need to get my message out there. And then I also need people to make phone calls on election day and make sure that people are going out to vote. Those are the most helpful ways that we can truly get the numbers that we need to win this race.
All right. And we will put a link to your website on our website so people can find you.
Perfect.